He was just a quiet mechanic in a snow-blanketed town, haunted by a tragedy, living in silence, fixing broken engines but never his own heart. Then, one freezing morning, he saw a lifeless figure beneath the ice. He dove in, and when she whispered just 6 words, words barely heard but impossible to forget, his life was never the same again. What happens when the person you rescue ends up rescuing you? This is a story of quiet love, second chances, and the extraordinary power of simple kindness. If you believe in stories that heal, inspire, and stay with you long after they end, make sure to subscribe and tap the bell so you won't miss what's next. Now, let's begin. Cal Whitaker had never planned to walk the lake that morning. He didn't plan much these days. His life was measured in cups of lukewarm coffee, the creak of old tools, and the rhythm of wrench turning at his auto shop, nothing more. Plans were for people who had something to look forward to. Cal had learned to stop looking ahead the winter he lost his daughter. The sky above Lakemont, Minnesota was the color of steel wool, heavy and low. Snowflakes drifted down in silence so thick it seemed sacred. The kind of silence that didn't ask for words. It simply was. That's what Cal liked about winter. It didn't expect anything from you. His boots crunched over the fresh layer of snow as he walked the perimeter of the lake. It was a ritual more than a destination. Every year around this time, right after Thanksgiving, just before the holidays began to scream their way into the world, he came here. The lake hadn't just taken his daughter. It had taken the last version of himself that believed in miracles, in redemption, in anything. And yet, he still came. Halfway around the bend, past the old wooden dock that hadn't seen a boat in years, something caught his eye. A shape, barely visible beneath the ice, muted by the shifting snow and morning haze. It looked like a log at first. But logs didn't wear red. Logs didn't float with their arms out like they were reaching for something they'd never grasp again. Cal's breath froze in his chest. "No, no, no, no," he whispered, already moving. He dropped to his knees at the lake's edge, brushing away the snow with his gloves. The face under the surface was pale, lips tinted blue, hair fanned out like seaweed. A girl, young. Her hand was still clutching something, what looked like a notebook or maybe a sketch pad. Cal didn't think, didn't calculate risk. He smashed the ice with a rock he found nearby, punching through with bare, bleeding hands when the rock gave out. The cold bit deep, but pain was a distant cousin to the adrenaline pumping through his veins. The water swallowed him as he dove. Seconds stretched. He reached her, wrapped an arm around her waist, and pulled. The weight of soaked clothes made her heavier than she looked. His chest burned, but his grip held. When he broke through the surface again, gasping, dragging her body onto the snow-covered shore, he began compressions automatically. The movements were rough, unpracticed, but desperate. "Come on," he grunted. "Come on, kid, breathe." Then, a cough. A choked, ragged noise like life clawing its way back in. She turned her head, vomited lake water onto the snow, and gasped for air with eyes fluttering halfway open. Her body trembled violently. Cal took off his coat, wrapping it around her. "You're all right," he whispered. "You're all right now." She looked at him, dazed. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Then, barely audible, "I wish someone had saved me sooner." Then she passed out. At the ER, they worked quickly. Tubes, wires, oxygen. The nurses called it a miracle. The young woman had no ID, no phone, just that ruined sketchbook she'd gripped even under ice. They logged her in as Jane Doe, another ghost, trying to survive the Minnesota winter. Cal stayed. He told himself he'd just wait to make sure she was stable, that once the doctors took over, he'd head home. But when she was transferred to a quiet room, breathing steady, color slowly returning to her cheeks, he found himself sitting beside her, coat still damp, knuckles raw, heart pounding in a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. That whisper replayed in his head like a broken radio. I wish someone had saved me sooner. What did she mean? Was it just the cold talking? Or had she been drowning long before she fell into that lake? His eyes drifted to the sketchbook. A nurse had left it on the bedside table, its edges curled and flaking. He picked it up. The cover was smudged charcoal. Inside, water-blurred drawings. They were haunting. Faces without features, empty chairs, a little girl sitting in a window, staring at nothing. And then, near the center, a drawing of a man standing alone on a frozen lake. The man was turned away, but Cal knew it was him. Somehow, she had drawn him before they'd ever met. That night, as the snow fell heavier and the hospital lights dimmed, Cal sat with a girl whose name he didn't know, holding a sketchbook full of pain, wondering for the first time in 10 years if maybe he hadn't come to the lake by accident after all. Cal hadn't slept. The chair beside the hospital bed was stiff, unforgiving, just like the part of him that told him to walk away after the doctors declared the girl stable. But he didn't, couldn't. It had been years since he felt that stubborn pull in his chest, the one that wouldn't let him turn his back. Outside the window, the snow kept falling, soft and persistent like time itself. The world was still frozen, but something inside him had started to shift. The girl hadn't stirred since she passed out in his arms. Machines hummed steadily beside her, tracking each breath, each heartbeat like fragile promises. She was small, wrapped in too many blankets for her frame, and yet she still looked cold. Her skin, though warming, had that ghostly quality, like she'd almost crossed a line and hadn't quite made it all the way back. Cal leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He stared at the floor, at the corner of the sketchbook he'd tucked under his chair. That whisper wouldn't leave his mind. I wish someone had saved me sooner. He'd heard pain before, seen it etched into the eyes of grieving customers, or in the silence of old men who came to his garage just to tinker and avoid going home. But this was something else. That whisper hadn't been about the lake. Not just the lake. It had come from somewhere deeper. A nurse entered quietly with a chart, glancing at the monitors. "She's doing better than we expected," she said. "Young body, strong heart, she was lucky." Cal nodded, his voice low. "She say anything else?" "No name, no family. No missing person reports match her yet." The nurse glanced at the sketchbook. "That hers?" "Yeah." "Maybe it'll help when she wakes up." Cal looked down at the girl's face. Her lashes trembled ever so slightly. There was something both fragile and fierce about her, as if the world had tried to break her, and she'd let it, only halfway. He felt it again, that irrational weight in his chest, a connection that made no sense but demanded something of him. Responsibility? Maybe. Guilt? Possibly. But beneath that was something quieter, familiar. Loneliness recognizes its own. Hours passed. The snowstorm outside turned the world into a blur of white and shadow. Cal dozed off for only a few minutes, head tilted against the wall, arms crossed over his chest. He woke to the sound of rustling sheets. She was awake. Her eyes were open, unfocused at first, scanning the ceiling like she didn't quite believe where she was. Then they moved, slowly, toward him. Cal stood, unsure of what to say. He wasn't used to introductions, certainly not like this. "Hey," he said gently, "you're safe." She blinked, her throat working like she wanted to speak but wasn't sure how. Her lips moved, cracked and dry. He reached for the water and held it to her mouth. She drank just a little and let out a hoarse whisper. "Where?" "Lakemont Hospital," he replied. "You were under the lake. I pulled you out." She closed her eyes. For a moment, he thought she might cry, but when she opened them again, there were no tears, just confusion. "I don't remember," she said. "Not the lake, not how I got there." "What about your name?" he asked. A pause. "Ivy," she said, barely audible. "I think Ivy Monroe." Cal repeated the name to himself like it might anchor her. "Ivy?" She nodded faintly. Then her eyes drifted past him, toward the sketchbook on the chair. "Is that mine?" He picked it up, held it out. "I think so. You were holding on to it when I found you." She took it with trembling hands and opened the first few pages. Her expression didn't change. Her fingers paused on one of the drawings. Two faceless figures sitting apart on a park bench. Then another, just a window, empty, dark. "I drew these," she said softly, "but I don't remember doing it." "That's all right," Cal said. "Memories take their time." She looked at him then, really looked. "Why are you here?" Cal hesitated. He didn't have an easy answer. "Guess I just didn't want you waking up alone." Ivy blinked at that, her lips parting slightly like she wanted to ask something more. But instead, she looked back at the sketchbook and whispered, "Thank you." He didn't say, "You're welcome." It felt too small for what had passed between them. Later that night, after the nurses had done their rounds and Ivy had drifted into a quiet sleep, Cal stood at the doorway. He should have gone home, showered, slept, gone back to his life. But instead, he took a seat again and watched the snow pile higher outside. Because for the first time in a decade, he didn't want to be anywhere else. The wind had calmed by morning, leaving behind a world cocooned in white. Lakemont looked like a postcard, pristine, untouched, a lie dressed in beauty. Cal knew better. Snow was just cold silence, dressing up what was broken underneath. He stood at the hospital window, arms crossed, a disposable coffee cup cooling in his hand. Ivy was asleep again, though her rest was fitful. Every so often, she murmured in her dreams, barely formed words, fragments that dissolved before he could grasp their meaning. He didn't want to hover, didn't want to care more than he should. But something about the way she'd clutched that sketchbook, how she looked at her own art like it belonged to someone else, it haunted him. He recognized the feeling. He had lived it. When she woke mid-morning, Ivy was more alert. Her voice had strength now, though it was still soft, like someone testing the waters after a long silence. "You stayed," she said simply, watching him from the bed. Cal set down his cup. Didn't feel right leaving. Her lips quirked, a ghost of a smile. "That's kind of you." "I don't know if it's kindness," he replied honestly. "Maybe just habit. I fix things for a living. Guess I didn't know how to walk away from something broken." Ivy lowered her gaze to the sketchbook lying on her lap. "I don't feel broken. I feel..." She paused. "Empty." "Same difference some days," Cal murmured. A beat of silence passed between them. Then she opened the book again, this time slower, studying each page as if it were a puzzle she was piecing together. "Did you look through this?" she asked without looking up. "Yeah," Cal admitted. "You had it when I found you. Waterlogged, but it made it." "I drew all of these," she said, almost to herself. "But I don't remember drawing any of them." Cal stepped closer. "What do you see?" She flipped to a page with a girl sitting alone in a diner, her coffee untouched. The walls around her were exaggerated, leaning in like they were about to swallow her whole. "I think I was afraid," Ivy whispered. "A lot." He didn't ask why. The answer didn't matter. Not yet. What mattered was that she'd made it to the other side of that fear, even if she didn't remember how. Her fingers turned the page again. This time, she paused. It was the sketch Cal remembered most. A man standing alone on a frozen lake, shoulders hunched, surrounded by gray shadows. Ivy stared at it for a long time. "This one," she said. "I don't know why it feels familiar." Cal felt something catch in his throat. "That's me," he said quietly. She blinked, turning to look at him. "What?" "I think it's me, or it looks like me. The lake, the posture. I go out there sometimes just to think." Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. "I drew you before we met?" she asked. "Maybe," Cal said. "Or maybe we were just meant to meet." He hadn't meant to say that. It sounded foolish, sentimental, but Ivy didn't flinch. Instead, she turned back to the drawing and whispered, "I've always believed in those things. In connections." There was a long pause, filled only by the soft beep of machines and the muted sounds of the hospital outside the room. "I don't know what happened to me," she said eventually. "Why I was in that lake. But I don't think I fell in. I think..." She swallowed. "I think I wanted to disappear." Cal sat down beside her, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "You don't have to explain, not to me." "I want to," she said, "just not yet." He nodded. "All right." They sat like that for a while, two strangers bound by something neither of them could quite name. Outside, the sun had started to rise, casting pale golden light on the snow. For the first time in days, it didn't look cold. It looked hopeful. That afternoon, the doctor came in and gave Ivy a tentative timeline for discharge. 2 more days, maybe 3. Her vitals were strong, and her memory might come back with rest and familiarity, but she'd need somewhere to stay. Cal didn't hesitate. "She can stay with me," he said before Ivy could speak. The doctor blinked. "Are you family?" "No," Cal replied. "Just someone who found her. Someone who's got an empty house and a heater that works." He turned to Ivy. "Only if you want to." She studied him for a moment, eyes steady, then she gave a small nod. "Okay." That night, as Cal drove home alone to make space for a guest he hadn't expected, he thought of the sketchbook again. A stranger had drawn him, his solitude, his sorrow, before she knew his name. And now, for reasons he didn't understand, he would help her redraw her life from the beginning. The snow had settled into heavy drifts by the time Cal pulled his truck into the driveway. The porch light cast a warm amber glow over the frozen ground, cutting a path through the blue-white stillness. His house stood modest and plain, a single-story cabin with wood siding and an aging roofline that creaked in the wind. It wasn't much, but it was clean, quiet, and warm. He stepped out first and walked around to open Ivy's door. She moved slowly, cautiously, bundled in borrowed hospital layers and a coat he'd dug from the back of his hall closet. It was a little too big for her, but she didn't seem to mind. Cal held the door open and gestured toward the porch. "Mind the step? It's stubborn this time of year." She smiled faintly and nodded, following him up. Her boots crunched softly in the snow, and for a moment the air between them was filled with nothing but that familiar winter hush. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of cedar and machine oil. A wood-burning stove crackled softly in the corner. The living room was small but cozy, worn furniture, a few framed photos turned face down, a threadbare rug, and a fireplace mantel cluttered with hand tools, loose change, and dust. "I didn't expect company," Cal said, a little self-conscious. "But I've got clean sheets and a decent coffee pot. That's about the best I can offer." "It's perfect," Ivy replied, stepping in and turning slowly as if absorbing the space. It feels still. Cal raised an eyebrow. Still? She nodded, like nothing's rushing me here. He didn't know how to respond to that, so he just motioned toward the hallway. Bedrooms down there, fresh towels in the closet. Bathrooms across the hall. I'll sleep out here on the couch. You don't have to. I want to, he interrupted, gently but firm. Besides, I snore. You don't want that kind of trauma this early. That earned him a soft laugh, and for the first time, he saw something flicker in her expression, something unguarded. After Ivy had settled into the guest room, Cal made himself a pot of coffee and returned to the living room. He didn't turn on the TV, just sat on the couch, mug in hand, staring at the wood stove like it held some ancient wisdom he'd missed all these years. He'd lived alone for so long that the sounds of another person moving in his house, a door creaking open, soft footsteps on old floorboards, felt foreign. But not unpleasant. More like remembered. At some point, Ivy reappeared, her hair damp from a shower, wearing a sweater and sweatpants he'd left on the bed. She held her sketchbook in her hands like it was something sacred. "Can I sit?" she asked. Cal nodded and shifted to one side of the couch. She sat carefully, opening the sketchbook on her lap. "I looked through more of it," she said, "and it's strange, some of the drawings. I think they're memories, but others, they feel like dreams. Can you tell which is which?" She shook her head. "Not yet." Cal sipped his coffee. "Maybe it doesn't matter right now. Sometimes what we imagine tells us just as much as what we remember." Ivy tilted her head, considering. "That's a very poetic thing for a mechanic to say." He smirked. "I read bumper stickers sometimes." That made her laugh again, light and sudden. Her face lit up in a way that made Cal's chest tighten, though he didn't know why. She turned a page. "This one." She paused. "It's of a garage. I think it might be yours." Cal leaned over. The sketch was rough, but unmistakable. The open bay door, the pegboard of tools, even the dent in the side of the workbench he'd had since his 20s. "I must have seen it," Ivy said, frowning, "but I don't remember when." "Or maybe it's something you needed," Cal said. "A safe place. A quiet one." She looked at him then, eyes dark and steady. "Do you think broken people recognize each other?" Cal didn't answer right away. He stared into his coffee for a long time before speaking. "I think broken people stop pretending first. Maybe that's how they find each other." Ivy nodded slowly. "I like that." They sat in silence again, this time not awkward, but shared. The kind of silence that comes when two people are slowly finding room for each other in the quiet spaces of their own hearts. Eventually, Ivy closed the sketchbook and leaned back. "Thank you," she said softly. "For this. For not asking questions I'm not ready to answer." "You'll tell me when you're ready," Cal replied. "And if you never are, that's okay too." She gave him a look then, sharp and gentle all at once. "I think I will," she said. That night, after she went back to the guest room and closed the door behind her, Cal stayed awake a while longer, watching the stove. He didn't know where any of this was going, didn't know what Ivy's story truly was, or how long she'd stay. But for the first time in years, his house didn't feel empty. And neither did he. The morning began with the hiss of an old coffee pot and the scent of dark roast seeping into every corner of the quiet house. Cal stood by the stove, watching the amber liquid drip slowly into the pot. He wasn't used to making 2 mugs. The last time he had was years ago, before the accident, when mornings were still filled with laughter and the occasional burnt toast. Now it was silence and ritual. Until Ivy. She appeared in the doorway, hair still tousled from sleep, wrapped in that oversized coat again like armor. Cal didn't say anything right